Well, welcome one more time here on your channel, Maponga J, live in Johannesburg. Too many things are happening at the same time. We just woke up this morning to the realization of the passing away of President Magufuli, and back to back also with the burial of King Zolitini. And while we are there also, we have the passing away of Menzi, our famous artist on the South African space. And I did not have an opportunity to travel down due to some other commitments here in the Johannesburg area. But I thought maybe for this morning I would do a tribute, a music tribute to mourn the passing away of our heroes, our heroes on the continent. I'm holding in my hand an instrument all the way from Senegal. They call it a kora. It's a kora. It's a huge instrument. If you would care to know, when they are doing the Kora Awards, they are trying to celebrate this this very instrument. So I'll do maybe just a minute or 2 or 3 minutes and do for you a music tribute. I woke up this morning with this song in my Well, the passing away of Magufuli leaves a very terrible, terrible taste in our mouths as Africans. We are indeed in a very messy position with poor quality of leadership on the continent. It looks like our future is at the mercy of the European economists, the Western pharmaceuticals, and the politically correct politicians that are on the continent. Conspiracy theories have become a source of information for conversation. There's a video that was released sometime last week, I think, to the 27 million euros that were sent to Tanzania, which are actually contrary to the passing away of Magufuli. Yes, we are talking also about the passing away of leadership in Africa. And I want to put it in context that while we are mourning the passing away of His Majesty Beguzulu Makeba in Cape Town, we are also mourning the passing away of Magufuli in Tanzania. And the conspiracies that are around this pandemic that we are finding ourselves in cause us to panic. Is it possible that for us to survive and live, we must actually be in harmony with colonial systems? Because how do you make a donation of 27 million euros and you give an ultimatum to a country in 48 hours that you want something to happen, and within the space of that time we hear that Magufuli has also passed away? However, in African culture we know when kings pass away, they don't go alone, they go with other people. And hence in South Africa we have funerals that are taking place everywhere. Leaves are falling from the trees. The question we have is who is next, and what are the circumstances that are surrounding the political, the cultural activists that we have on the continent and beyond. My prayers and my condolences, they are sent deeply to the Zulu monarch, lest the conversations people could have been having around the involvement of the royal house in the political conversations on the South African country. In our culture, when someone has passed away, we all come together as Africans and we hold our tongues as Africans. We mourn together, we cry together, we share our condolences to the royal family. And I'm not saying so just for cosmetic purposes. This is a family that I happen to know personally at various levels of my engagement in my pastoral duties. And I would like to share my sincere condolences. And before I could even finish wiping my eyes on the passing away of the king, here I am as a Pan-Africanist also, hearing the passing away of Magufuli. It really, it's a toxic time where you don't know how to cry. We don't know how to mourn, because while you're mourning one, you are actually preparing for the next one. I mean, the week was bad enough to start off with the passing away of Menzi, our favorite actor here on the country. Many of you have been watching generations around the continent and beyond. He has passed on. And just when we thought we were catching our breath, then we hear the king has also passed away. And we wake up this morning, Magufuli has passed away. Indeed, I think Africa needs to start looking at this pandemic seriously. But over and above the pandemic, we also needed to be aware that the enemy that fights our liberty, our sovereignty, is amongst us. And some of the biggest and the greatest enemies of that African dream are our African leaders, who to date are still pussyfooting around the issue of African security as a continent, to come together as a continent and militarize ourselves as a continent, create a security system as a continent that begins to protect each other, not only as individuals, but as a continent at large. Only a few days ago, we also hear, a few years ago, that Gaddafi was hunted down here on the continent when African leaders were watching. People laugh and giggle and mock when Mugabe made the statements on land issues and the events that followed that, without compromising and condoning the corrupt activities that African leaders will do. But in the midst of the problems that they create, there are also good decisions that they have made in that space. It's unfortunate that our mindset is always controlled by the colonial systems, which shapes our perception as to what we need to think. So we wake up one morning, we are told Madiba is a good leader. He passes away, we are told Madiba is a bad leader. Then you wake up in the morning, no, Mbeki is a good leader. Then the following morning, the same system is in the business again of destroying Mbeki. And then we hear, no, Zuma will be a better option. A few days later, no, Zuma is corrupt, Zuma must go. Now, no, Ramaphosa is a good leader. Then a few days later, no, Ramaphosa is a bad leader. And I'm saying so in the context of South Africa. And we have our own indigenous rulers, our own indigenous kings, who have been with us for the longest of time. And by Africans actually sometimes refusing that we don't want to be ruled, we don't want to be governed by African leaders, we want a democratic system. I mean, that's quite a weak argument, because in the midst of you saying you don't want to be governed by your own indigenous leaders, you are still being governed by colonial indigenous leaders. You throw away your own royal monarchs, you all throw away your own royal indigenous governance systems, and you end up again in the hands of the British, the royalties of Britain, who manifest themselves in your business transactions, who manifest themselves in your legislative frameworks, who manifest themselves in your education system, who manifest themselves in your entertainment, who manifest themselves in your fashion, who manifest themselves in your religion, whether it is Christianity and etc. And you look at the African and say, but where are you missing it? Where are you missing it? By running away from your own indigenous governance systems, you are running into European governance systems. And we know by now, we're grown-ups, we went to school, to know that even the democratic system is a surrogate child of the colonial system. The same political systems that we seem to uphold as democratic systems, in reality, their function, their backbone, their finances, it is still colonial. And therefore, our democratic systems that we may call our democracies, if they lack an internal conversation and a social conversation with the population at large, we may just find that we are swapping hyenas with foxes, because this whole system is not independent of the influences of colonial masters. And our governments are not totally powerful enough to snap off the umbilical cord of Western influences. And while we are crying the death of those ones, I also hear someone has just reminded me that the father of Menzi himself, the actor, the father has also passed away. And not only mentioning those few, but I hear myriads of funerals left, right, and center due to this pandemic. The death of the African, therefore, is not just a non-issue for conversation, because some of these deaths are a result of negligence of governments, negligence of pharmaceutical companies, negligence of political systems, and political will. I mean, I passed a comment the other day, and educated people came to me to lacerate me that I must not mention things that I don't know. Yes, I've never claimed to know anything. All I'm doing is to ask questions. That even if we say we have solutions that are seated in Johnson & Johnson, we have solutions that are seated with many other pharmaceutical international companies, World Health Organizations, the funders, the Bill Gates, and the rest of them. It's okay for us to look for external help in all the problems that we have. But are we not confident enough as Africans by now to begin a conversation that says, how do we also begin to develop our own indigenous solutions? Not in a bad way. It's as simple as taking these vaccines, for example, that have come from Europe, and take them to our universities and laboratories, check these vaccines, what are they made out of? What are the active ingredients? How do we begin then to develop our own indigenous vaccine issues? Not only the corona issue, but I'm talking at a bigger scale, where we're talking at our disaster management strategies as African countries. Because it's not only the corona pandemic. We have gone through AIDS, we have gone through syphilis, we have gone through Ebola, and some of these diseases such as HIV and AIDS are still a scourge on the African continent. Mosquitoes, malaria, and cholera, and all these other problems, some of them which are actually very, very situational, which people don't need to suffer those diseases if the governments in place were responsible enough to make sure people drink clean water, for example, and various instruments could be put into place to secure the African life. What do we say, therefore, as Africans? That we must be sitting on the corner of the building with an offering plate in our hands, waiting for donor money, waiting for solutions to come out from the West. So they will tell us what we must drink, they will tell us what we must eat, they will tell us how we must give birth, they will tell us how and when to vaccinate, they will tell us what medicines to use, they tell us how to marry our wives, they tell us again how to arrest each other, how to run our countries. And you look at this entire governance system and you ask it a very fundamental question. Is this governance system honest in respecting the African people? So that our conversation must not only become a political rhetoric. What is our banking like? Is our banking responding positively to the African issues? Is our insurances responding to the African issues? Do we have policies in place, for example, of how our children must get married? And so that you can buy a policy so that your child at a certain age, they can get married. Do we have a disaster management strategy so that should another disaster come up, how do we deal with it? So it looks like Africa is always caught with its pens down. It's always a crisis of leadership, a crisis of water, a crisis of disease, a crisis of politics, a crisis of religion and spirituality, a crisis. There's always a crisis. Every transition from one government to another leaves within us a bad taste, because Africans don't believe in sharing power without spilling blood. And of course, in the same wavelength, we need also to celebrate, even at the passing away of the king, that for the next few days, we don't know how long it will be, that Tanzania now has a woman as a president, which is the first of its kind in the east of Africa. And we hope that it will be a good initiative towards an inclusive governance system that actually tolerates, accommodates, improves, and changes the narrative of the African people. But the problem, which we don't want to look in the eye, is that you can change as many presidents as you want, But as long as the fundamental principle of a democratic system is in place, it is a continuous colonial system that oppresses the African people. And I think that is a conversation many political leaders don't want to engage in, because when they move into power, it is their chance to eat. It is their opportunity to harvest from the coffers of the state and build estates for themselves, steal money from their own people, move these monies into foreign-based accounts, sign business treaties with multinational companies, protect their own investments, as it were. Honestly speaking, the fastest way of making money in Africa, according to Dr. Lumumba, is to have a political career. Because once you have a political career, you have access to the tenders and the contracts, and you and your friends, you can actually begin to harvest from the coffers. And only after harvesting from the coffers, then you must wait for jurisdiction and legal issues to come into place. And many of our leaders are going to end up in jail. They're going to end up in prison. They're going to end up with their properties being confiscated and stuff like that. Why? Because the system at the core does not love the people. And honestly speaking, let's be frank, problems are good for political leaders, because as long as there are problems, then they have a reason to campaign. You use problems as your campaigning tool. We are going to give you clean water. We are going to give you housing. We are going to. So imagine if a government should fix all the problems. The next question is, how do you campaign for the next election if you have been able to solve all the problems? So problems, technically speaking, problems are a reason. Problems are a launching pad of political campaigns. So we are happy to hear that there is a woman president in Tanzania as we speak now, acting president. But the issue again is that when you get into power as a female president, are you going to prioritize the issues that pertain to women, for example? This includes, for example, maternities. Can you change the policies to make sure that women go on maternity not for 3 weeks or 3 months, but they can go for 1 year, so that they can begin to develop and grow their children, and put 2 years back to back, 1 year for the husband, 1 year for the wife. At least the baby that is coming into the world has 2 years. And I think the most unfortunate part is that when we get into power as Africans, we forget the people that put us into power, and we continue the same protocols of oppressing each other using these very same political instruments. We are here to mourn. We are in a season of mourning the passing away of the King Zwelithini. We are here to announce the passing away of Menzi and his father. We are also here to cry with the passing away of Magufuli. But what makes Magufuli one very, very colloquial is that there is money that is put in Tanzania, and the money is followed by a funeral. And people call these conspiracy theories. Well, you find the truth and you share the truth with us, and so that we as Africans can begin to know what sort of enemy are we looking at. And the passing away of Mageba in South Africa puts very complicated environment on our political terrain. We like it or not, the kingdom of the Zulu nation, inclusive to that are the Mtetwas, the Nyamboses, the Ngumalos, the Nzwides, the Bunganes, and other various tribes, the Shezis and the Qabes, all of them put together to have this unified Nguni nation under one umbrella, which happens to be the biggest population, by the way, in South Africa. And if democracy was serious, that it is majority rule, then I don't believe in democracy, because in that case, then the Zulu nation, due to democracy, if they should stand up right now as a nation and they decide to vote, it therefore goes without saying that the democratic system will actually be influenced by tribal, national, and societal powerful houses that have the greatest number of people. Hence, we can never undermine the involvement of Ubabu Msholozi, Jacob Zuma on the political conversation. The passing away of the king should not be undermined, because within it is the largest population of a country. The question is, how do we maximize, manage that powerful powerhouse which is in a tribal space by marginalizing those tribes, by marginalizing the Zulu nation, for example, or undermining their tears. And you laugh and you mock and you mourn and you scorn the Zulu monarch because you don't care. When now you are Sotho, you are Xhosa, etc. But have you sat down to think what would happen if the Zulu nation should come together and consolidate power? How will that affect the political conversation on the South African space? So the very same token, where you talk about democracy, if it functions and it has conversations that are honest with tribal, indigenous rulers, you may actually end up finding that your democracy will fall apart in the face of a nation that consolidates itself. The 60 million people that are in South Africa, directly or indirectly, more than 30 million of those people are directly or indirectly linked up to the Zulu monarch. And therefore, let us not be careless in our language as Africans, that we insult and we cause unnecessary conversations which are infiltrated by cultural differences. The passing away of the king is as important to your welfare and well-being in South Africa as it is important to the Zulu nation itself. It is those words that we say when a king has fallen and we plunge him to the ground. Let us allow a smooth transition. Because in the midst of us lacking that unification and unified voice in our tears, we may end up actually infiltrating and infuriating unnecessary turmoil and wars. We know what happened during the times of Inkatha, for example. We know what happened during the times of xenophobic attacks and etc. We know how much of that could actually be genuinely incubated within a certain cultural corner within the country. Therefore, we call for calm amongst fellow Africans, particularly South Africans, and that let us be a little bit more cautious in our language. I see when I read around the mass media space here and social space, some of our young children who may lack the greater understanding of issues at play, they may think that it is actually non-consequential to pass negative comments, to pass very unpunctuated, uncircumcised comments about the king of the Zulu, and you swear and you curse and that you don't care about this, you don't care about this. But remember that your democracy is very, very fragile in the hands of a dominant culture. The very language that you use, be careful that it does not become fuel to the greater peace of the country. We mourn with the Zulu nation, and this is my heartfelt 2 cents worth. It could mean nothing, but this is my 2 cents worth in terms of our conversation. When an elder has passed away, we all mourn. You hold your language, you hold your tongue, you speak kindly, and let us allow for a smooth transition on the South African political terrain. And we wish also that our government officials and other powers that be, that they could be sensitive enough that when ANC is right now sitting at a very delicate space of divisions within the political party and within the divisions within cultural lines, Mpumalanga with Babu Mabuza, Free State with Ubabu Ace Mahashule, KwaZulu Natal with Ubabu Umsholozi, and Untatu Ramaphosa in the Venda space, and the Ndebele tribes also that are in the north, and etc. And if you are to build a nation, then unity becomes a conversation that is very, very critical. And I think that our South African government needs to start taking indigenous leaders very seriously. We don't want them in a tribal house at the back of the parliament where you only consult them when it comes to rituals and etc. They must become part of the system. We also want to see them in the chambers where the Malemas are sitting, where the Holomisas are sitting, where the DAs are sitting. We also need the cultural houses to be directly present within that conversation so that they can also begin to have this meaningful input into issues of land, for example, issues of education, issues of culture, issues of fashion, issues of calendar, festivals, holidays, heroes, and etc., so that we don't leave out our wealth. And because cultural leaders are the house of ethics, the house of national spirituality. Look at Britain, for example. What keeps Britain together as a country is not the parliament. What keeps Britain together as a country is the royal monarch. You won't believe it. When I lived in London, the day that Saddam Hussein was bombed in Iraq, the headlines of the newspaper was actually reading Prince Anne's dog bites the queen's poodle, the queen's dog. Imagine, the queen's dog is beaten by Prince Anne's dog. And that became national news when bombs were falling in Iraq. Why? Because to them, their own cultural monarch and the news around the monarch actually dictate the temperature of the whole country. And I think Africa lacks that central place where we can say all the kings, for example, of South Africa, you come together, you appoint. You don't elect, you appoint one of you who can run executively the country. And then the parliament is accountable to the owners of the land. Because right now our parliament and our presidents are accountable to themselves. They appoint the judiciary system, they appoint the military, they appoint the legislative, they appoint the executive, whatever those three houses of power that you talk about. They are all appointed by the president. Therefore, the president is a law to himself. You cannot arrest the president, for example. You cannot do this, you cannot do this because he's the highest authority in the land. The question is, who does he account to? In the event that you have raised 500 billion, who did you speak to? In the event that it has disappeared, who holds you to book? In the event that there are files that we need, where do we find those files? I mean, look up to Zimbabwe, walk up to Botswana, walk up to Zambia, all our African presidents. Because under this democratic system, the president becomes accountable to himself. So as African leaders, we needed to see how do we bring our leaders to accountability. And I think the democratic system gives them slightly too much power, whereby they actually end up having activities, corruption included, crime included, murders included. Sometimes even speaking like this becomes a great risk because you never know at the end of the speech what will happen to you because the system in itself does not want to be held accountable. And some people, of course, educated, hey, Maponga, shut up, go back to your country and fix up your country. Stop talking about South Africa and etc. But I'm here in South Africa. I'm on my way to go back to my people. But the question is, if I should go back to Zimbabwe, will that change? Will that improve the situation? Or rather, we don't want to speak and speak honestly. I looked the other day, of course, last week, is it last week or the other week, when a student at Vets passed away and shot by the police, and boom, there you have it in the face. With all due respect that our young people want free education, hundreds. But why should we fight for free education? Why should we not give it to our children and not only give them free education, but actually the protest must not be around free education. The protest must be around an indigenous education system. So we need to transform even the education system itself so that our children don't go to school to be studying how many legs does a grasshopper have, how many wings does a mosquito have, and then you walk up after 4 or 5 years of university and you're still looking for a job. Transformation is due. We need our children to learn how to farm the land. They need to learn how to do crafts. They need to learn how to do technology, how to fix up cell phones. They need to learn how to create industries. We need to buy equipment from Europe, buy equipment from China, bring it to our universities, break these instruments apart, see how they are made, Go to Rustenburg, dig up the platinum. Go to Kimberley, dig up the gold. Go to Kurmani, dig up the iron. Manufacture our own cars. Our universities must actually become institutions of empowering a community rather than a manufacturing industries of employees. So that, for example, it's less than 2 kilometers away from Faradale, away from Mai, one of the biggest warehouses of indigenous medicines. And still our university here invests, the medical school here invests, will not want to move its pharmaceutical department to Faraday. So that our students, when they are studying, they are already learning how do you mix indigenous medicines with foreign medicines, create generic medicines which are honest and organic. So that even in the midst of this pandemic of corona, we should have been talking by now that we also have found the active ingredient. It is found in African potato. It is found in a bit of this. If you mix this herb and that herb, you end up with this solution. For me, these are not things that are astronomical. But unfortunately, we fight for free education. But after we get the free education, we are still fighting for a colonial education system itself. By so doing, are we not perpetuating the same problem which we are trying to run away from? It's most unfortunate that at the passing away of the king, we must be passing remarks such as this, but we want to resurrect within the African children, within our Alkebulan nation, the importance of our indigenous knowledge systems so that we can begin to find solutions for African problems. And until our academic institution begin to have a conversation of how do we convert this colonial monster into an indigenous system, we will continuously be talking as slaves while we are sitting on gold. We are still begging for gold. While we are producing platinum, we still don't know what they use platinum for in the world. While we could be the third or the fourth largest producer of uranium in the world, still our security is not safe because we cannot convert those into bombs, into weapons to protect our own country, nuclear warheads. So that should anyone be threatening us also, like North Korea has done to America, we can also point up our guns and say, we can also shoot, and uranium is here. We have the resource in Africa to produce the very same weapons. So we can use our resources basically to create a security around ourselves. And with those words, I would want to constantly be on your necks and on your uncomfortable side to say the solutions to Africa will need to be holistic. We only don't need good cell phones and good cars to be driving. If a tree does not have roots, that tree will not stand. Our culture and our history is our roots. Let us take our past, let us take our heritage, and let us buy the future that we are looking at. You can never inherit wealth from your father when you burn his house. Because when you burn your father's house, you have nothing to inherit. African culture, therefore, must remain as our currency for buying the future. Taking the technologies of the past, mixing them with the education of the present, so that we can begin to look into the future with confidence, so that we also have solutions in our hands. We don't constantly become beggars on the global soup kitchen. We don't become beggars because psychologically and mentally we are constantly bombarded with Eurocentric ideologies to such an extent that we mock, we insult, and we laugh at our own culture. Because now we are living in flats in Sunning Hill, we are living in flats in Morningside, we are living in flats in Sandton. And you think that you are anything else. The day you lose your job, you lose your car, you lose your flat, you lose your dignity, you even lose your wife and lose your husband. Indigenous methods of banking, for example, become a solution. Building our homes in the rural areas. At least you own the house. While you are still working, go to the bank. Organize a loan, 300,000-400,000, $500,000. Don't use that money to buy a penny dropper, a GTI. Take that money, go buy yourself a homestead. Yes, in Soshanguve, buy a homestead. In KwaZulu-Natal, buy a homestead in Kuruman. 2-3 huts around yourself, 3, 4, 5 cows. put them there, a few sheep and a few goats, a few chickens, and etc. The day you retire and the day you walk away from town, you have a home. You have a home where you can say, this is my house. And while you're still in town, once every 2 weeks or so, you go back to your farm and go and collect a few goats and a few sheep, kill them, put them in the boot of your car, come back to town and enjoy your life. Plant your cocoa in Uganda and in Kenya and etc. But we cannot think that by becoming these fast food consumers in the flats in town, putting on brands, Gucci's, putting on brands, Louis Vuitton, driving cars, BMWs, series 4, 5, 6, 7 series. And we think that we have become civilized and we have become better people. Whereas you are being sterilized through food. You are being murdered through medicines. You are being dwarfed through education. You are being vandalized as a nation. And some of you see nothing wrong with that. That's what it is like. We've gone too far. We can't turn back. Yes, we can turn back. All it took was a group of Europeans to sell their homes in London, in Britain, in Germany, and in France, and in Italy, packed their bags. They came to Africa. They risked, one generation risked to come to Africa. Right now, here we are, complaining about Stellenbosch, complaining about Europeans. And we, as the parents of this generation, are not prepared to sacrifice. One generation must sacrifice our banking, sacrifice our means to production. Yes, we will die, but we will not leave our children in the same position that we found them. You can say everything that you want to say. The policy that Robert Mugabe put into place, yes, it's being abused. It's being abused by some of the government ministers and the state. But I can tell you, honestly speaking, the currency has gone down. People are suffering in poverty. Corruption is rife. But it's a fact that now land is in the hands of the people. What they do with it now depends on their political will. But ultimately, by owning the land, we own the rights to water. We own the rights to accommodation. We own the rights to mining. We own the rights to what is above the ground, what is on the ground, and what is underneath the ground. What we have to deal with now is the leadership of the country to see how do we convert these resources into a profit for the country. So it's not a bad thing that Africans must own their land. It's not a bad thing at all. When you live in London, you own your house. What is underneath the house belongs to the Queen. What is above the house belongs to the Queen. They come to Africa here, they want to own the house, what is under the house, what is above the house, and the neighbors that are around are all slaves to the landlord who is on the side of the road. There is nothing wrong with Africans owning land. There's nothing wrong with that. Because there's nothing wrong also with the British owning British land. There's nothing wrong with a German owning German land. There's nothing wrong with an Australian owning Australian land. Why must the African apologize for owning land in Africa? And by the way, if we don't have land, we also don't have the rights even to bury our own loved ones. And some of you may not know, when a king has passed away, as he has done, a king is not dead. We say he has bowed. He is bowed. He is not buried. He is planted. And he's planted in a mountain. He's planted in a cave. He is made to sit upright. And you need land so that you can even bury your loved ones. Right now, there are some conversations that are going on around town. What is better, to bury or to burn? To burn or to bury? Let's cremate. Let's burn. Let's throw the ashes around and etc. Yes, let's have that conversation because we don't own the land. Because right now, at the rate at which we are burying each other, it looks like much of our cities will end up as graveyards. Even better, a challenge. You, who has lost your loved ones, and your parents are buried in cemetery somewhere in Johannesburg or in Durban or in Harare or in Kampala. Go to the shop tomorrow or tonight. Go and buy a tree, a fruit tree, and go and plant it on the grave of your own forefathers. Maybe we can convert these graveyard concrete jungles into sacred forests where fruits and animals and birds can return. And we can at least a few years later consider these as sacred forests where our parents are lying down and where we can go back to this tree and eat the avocados, eat the mangoes, eat the oranges, which are sitting on the graves of our own fathers and our own forefathers. And who will come to a tree of the Ngubanes to harvest fruits that must be eaten by the Mkizes? So it's just a suggestion, for example, on how do we mourn in the 21st century, so that instead of populating our cities with these concrete blocks of cement we call graveyards and tombstones, we would rather convert these cemeteries into forests where we can plant trees. And our municipalities, since they have so much energy of watering flowers, why can they not take the same water and go and water the fruit trees so that communities can have access to fruits? My 2 cents worth, for what it is worth, so that we know how to cry and we cry profitably. And let's plant trees. The king has rested. Let's plant trees so that we can harvest the fruits from those trees. Those who plant flowers will never eat fruits. Every generation must decide the quality of its plantation. We know the future is secure when the fathers plant the trees and they know that their children will come and harvest and eat the fruits that they have planted. One generation must plant the trees so that another generation will harvest. Plants and seeds of thoughts, plants and seeds of intellectual aptitude, plants and seed of indigenous governance systems. One generation must sacrifice so that another generation will come and harvest. Bayet, Peguzul. Bayet, Zul, Zandla Pezul. Our condolences to the Magufulis, our condolences to the Ngubanes, our condolences to the greater African continent for the passing away of a true Pan-Africanist. With those few words, I thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.